Have you heard that rich people use debt so they don't have to pay taxes and they can make more money by borrowing against their assets? And did you know that you can do that with crypto? There's going to be a different risk assessment you need to make if you're looking at borrowing in any crypto on both the collateral side as well as the debt you're taking outside. I set up this framework to show you this because most people are not going to understand this. We have Pulse Chain and PulseX launching very soon, which means that Liquid Loans and Fiat.io, both lending protocols, are going to allow people to take their crypto and use that as collateral to borrow different type of crypto against them. And that has some very unique risks relative to fiat debt, what debt is in the legacy world. We're going to cover what that is, as well as there's four different ways you can take a look at this debt here in the crypto land, so to speak, and they each come with different how you can think about the risks associated with them. But this is the framework you can use to apply to any type of protocol. So with that being said, if this is your first time here, what's good? My name is Sam, and for those of you who are returning, it's good to freaking see you. So if this is your first time here, there's some links down below if you'd like to support, or jump over to Twitter, other YouTube channel related to fitness, or anything along those lines. And if you're returning, I'm just thankful that you're here. If you haven't already subscribed, you should definitely do that. So Liquid Loans, just very quickly, is a protocol that allows you to put in Pulse, which is a volatile asset, and borrow against it. You don't have to pay any interest, and there's no term, meaning there's no payback period on that. Fiat is going to be similar to Aave, which is a protocol on Ethereum, except for Fiat is going to be on Pulse Chain. So in here, you can place your debt or your collateral, and then you can borrow against it, and you can borrow different things against it. The interest just gets collateralized against your debt, so that you move closer and closer towards default as time goes on. And as I just described these, if you're new to crypto, you may be like, well, that's not how traditional debt works. Well, let's just describe what traditional debt works, or how it works, right? So we're going to talk about some fiat debt here. Let's use a little bit bigger of a pen. So fiat debt here, right? So that's going to be like a traditional, you're going to have an interest rate, and you're going to have the principal. These two things are going to be spread out over some type of amortization schedule, and then you're going to have a payment to make every single month, right? Whoa, that's not how you spell payment, right? So you're going to have a payment every single month that's going to generally be composed of interest plus your principal for fiat debt. So what is the risk here? Well, you might not be able to pay that payment. Pretty simple, right? You might not be able to pay that payment, and then that would not be fun, right? Then you still have to pay that debt off, or if you're in a business, maybe you file bankruptcy. How is this different than crypto debt? Well, in this scenario here, let's think about what happens if somebody were to own a house and they pull money out against their house. Okay, so let me get rid of a couple of these things. Say I own a house, right? And I decide to borrow against my house, right? I'm currently doing that. There's a front door, it's got this lawn here, and then there's one individual tree here, right? And they want to get a loan against this house. Now, if, say, this house goes up in value, would you want well, first of all, what happens to this? You can let me know down below in the comments. What happens to the loan? Nothing, right? Here in America, nothing happens to the loan. But if you're borrowing against a house, 99% of the time, you're using fixed debt, right? So nothing happens to the interest rate or the principal payment here. It's 99% of the time it's fixed. So your debt stays the same. The house goes up and you just have more equity in there. Well, what happens if we take a look at this in the other direction? Because you want to set this up to understand the crypto piece. Well, what happens if your house goes down? Well, again, nothing happens to the loan. Your principal and interest are both going to be fixed. So they're going to stay the same. You still have the same payment to make every single month. Now, how is this a little bit different with crypto? Let's take a look. When we consider the risks of crypto, we have to understand that because the thing is still called debt and you use collateral and you borrow against it, it's not necessarily the same risks as this. So this is the framework you can use to take a look at how crypto borrowing can work, right? And there could be other nuanced risks on top of this, right? Say if you were comparing a loan with liquid loans versus a loan with fiat, right? One does not have interest, one more than likely is going to have some type of interest. This does not have any payment terms in terms of paying it back. This might have payment terms, or just actually I don't think it has any payment terms. It just has once it gets to a point, you just default on it and your crypto is sold, right? So this one creeps up over time, this one does not. So we're not going to take a look at those specifically. More generally, this is how you can look at the risk. You have the contract risk. So that's what happens if the code is hacked, right? Here or here, right? That could be a problem. Your shit could be booked. Say goodbye, right? Just kiss your shit goodbye. Bye, Felicia. Now, the contract could be fucked up, or you could also be hacked, right? And obviously, this could be the same thing over in this world here too, potentially. Nobody's really going to steal your house necessarily, unless you do something real stupid. That's a very infrequent event. But people getting hacked individually for the crypto in the world we're in right now happens often, right? So people are not going to steal your house, but they will be able to steal your crypto if you do something stupid. But what about the actual crypto involved? What other risks does that propose? Because the environment is different, as we just talked about, right? The contract can be hacked. Where in this world that people have been doing this for, I don't know, 100 years plus. So you don't have, there's a lot of iterations and ironing out of these problems for the contract risk for being hacked. And when we look at the prices of houses, they're what? They're pretty freaking stable, right? They don't change tremendously. So we have something that is stable, right? Actually, I like that blue. Let's switch back to the blue. So you could, let's just set this up in terms of the different types of things. You could borrow a stable coin and use a stable coin as collateral on there, right? So you have, say, USDC and you borrow Tether, right? You have $6 million of USDC and you borrow $3 million of Tether against that, right? That's something you could do. The only risk really different, that's going to be the one that's most similar to this type of debt, except for there's no payment for if it was, well, I say not going to be that one. So if it was in, say, Aave, right, or something, you're just going to have the interest added to your monthly bill. So you're not going to have like the cash flow or the risks over here. The risk over here is going to be cash flow, right, the payment, cash flow. You're not going to have that here. Just the default, or Luna UST issue where the shit goes bonk, right? $40 billion down the toilet, right? So assuming that they didn't do that, right? But that would be a risk. That's actually one I should put over here. We can call that pegging risk, risk. I wouldn't Google that if you're not familiar with it. Um, pegging, right? This is the pegging risk of the stables. And that could happen with either side. This side could go to zero or this side could go to zero. That could be invalidated or something along those lines, right? Whether the company behind the stable, like there's a company behind USDC, they could just go under, right? It's definitely possible. We've seen crazier things happen. Now, what if you had other crypto and you borrowed a stable? Well, that changes the risk profile. Now, instead of having these other risks, you have volatility risk, like where we have the cash flow thing here, where nothing changes if the price of the asset goes up or down, right? It doesn't affect anything. As long as you're able to just pay your bill, that's all that matters. Over here, you may have to increase the amount of capital because now you're holding volatility risk. Same thing over here. We're going to explain volatility risk a little bit more in a moment. A volatility risk increases the risk of default, basically. So you put up USDC and you borrow any risky asset. So basically any asset, these are all potentially risky assets, but in this case it would be something that's not pegged to a specific value like a USDC or any type of stable coin, right? So you're going to hold volatility risk. That's the risk that shit goes up and down, right? So if the price drops, and we know the price can drop on crypto very quickly, right? I think when I looked up the stats last time, there was in one day, Ethereum dropped by 33%. So that could say it happens in one day, and then the next day it drops by another 33%, and the next day it drops by 33%, and the next day it drops by 33%. Right? You can get defaulted on your loan because you're holding volatility risk. Where, again, back here, if your house goes down in value, you might be underwater, but you're fine. You're not going to default as long as you continue to make your payments. Here, there are no payments, right? So to speak. I mean, there's one that's getting collateralized in something like Aave or Fiat, and when I say that, that just means it's getting added to your loan balance. One way to think about that. Now, if you use a risky asset, something that goes up and down, and you borrow a risky asset, you get volatility squared. It's a fancy way of just saying there's a lot more risk on that one. Now, to understand these in better detail, like this, in the bottom corner here, we have the loan, right? And in the top here, we have the collateral. Whoops, looks like my computer's freezing. We have the collateral. So when the collateral goes down in value, this increases your risk of default, right? Liquid loans, once you get below 110%, once you hit 110% period, you're up for default, which means that your stuff will be sold, which then could, if you're in the United States, will trigger a tax event, right? If there's any, even if it's a tax loss, right? So you've lost a lot of money on it, it's still a tax event, right? And you increase the risk of your default or losing that underlying crypto. Now, in that same scenario, right, where we said volatility risk squared, your loan in this example is another crypto as well. So you have crypto as the collateral, and then you're pulling out another crypto which is volatile. And that means you have volatility squared. So in this case, what happens if, whoa, that was a pretty freaking awesome line. You guys should definitely give me a thumbs up for that artistic ability there. If you do a scenario like we just described, and you have a risky asset and you borrow a risky asset against that risky asset, you can have the scenario where your collateral goes down in value and your debt goes up in value. That same thing can happen. Think of Hedron. right? Hedron allows you to take an advance against your HSI stake. For those of you who are not aware, Hedron is a protocol that's attached to Hex. So somebody does an HSI stake, they can borrow Hedron against their HSI stake. What does that mean? If Hedron has a, say, 10x or 50x, and they took that and they bought something else, or they went out and bought a car with that money, then what happens in the future after some period of time where there's a 10x or 50x on that? Well, in this scenario, right, with the house, nothing would happen, right? In the other scenario, nothing would happen. But what if we have this scenario and your house goes up in value by 10x, right? My house, let's do something more like what's happened here, right? So I have this house I'm living in is 3x in about 5 years, right? Well, in the scenario I was just describing, with a Hedron HSI stake that you can borrow against it, and then you use that to go buy cotton candy at the fair. Well, if this has a 10x, because you borrowed Hedron. So say in this scenario, to make sure that this is cemented in your mind, if your house goes up in value, do you want your debt to also go up in value? No, you do not want your debt to go up in value, because then you get to make the margin between your debt and the house value, right? That's called equity. When you have a loan that is risky or volatile, you can have the loan value increase so that your debt is more expensive in the future. If you borrowed, let's do a little example here. If you borrow, say, 10K in that same scenario, and then as a 10x, and you just bought your cotton candy at the fair, or you spent your $10,000 on a toenails or whatever you bought, now it's at a 10x, right? Your debt is now $100,000. Now, to pay that back, you need to go buy something that's more expensive to pay that off. Your debt is far more expensive. And what if the collateral at the same time dropped in value? And especially in the scenario that we're talking about here, crypto on crypto, not just with the Hedron, right? Because there's different protocols that allow you to do different things. Say in the Aave example, where you put in, say, or the fiat, right? You put in a risky asset and then you pull out a risky asset. That would be this here, right? So you could have the collateral drop in value. Look at all these lines. Let's get rid of some of these lines. You could have the collateral drop in value, which is increasing your default risk. At the same time, your debt becomes more expensive and you're underwater, just like you would be here, or you could be potentially underwater, is a better way to put it. So when you're thinking about debt and tax savings from borrowing, right, first of all, we have to remember the IRS may or may not rule in our favor when they provide clarification. You can check out my other video on taxes by checking out the channel and then searching for taxes to get a better idea of where the IRS is currently standing. I've read through what the IRS has published and the Q&As that they have, and I present it in that video. So as you think about this and you're like, debt's awesome, right? Like, I completely agree, debt is awesome, but just be very cognizant of what is taking place. So in this scenario here, we have a stable coin and you borrow another crypto. Well, what if that crypto dropped in value, right? Tremendously. Excuse me. Then you say if you bought something and then you went out and sold it and you borrowed it and then it comes back and it's 50% less, then you can pay it back cheaper. But if this goes up in value and you do the same thing, right, in the same scenario we were just describing, that's where you have more expensive debt. And the same thing happens over here, but on terms of the collateral side. So you can have it on the amount you borrow side or the collateral side. And in this scenario, in this bottom corner, you have it on both sides. The collateral is more risky and the loan is more risky. If you found this video interesting, if you plan on using this framework, tell somebody else about it. Take a second, share this video. You can check out my other channel related to fitness if you want to help out. I have a bet with my buddy for Twitter that I cannot beat his Twitter following. So if you want to help me out on Twitter, jump down below on Twitter, say what's good, press the follow button, press the retweet button. Let me know what you thought of this video here. Appreciate you. Talk to you soon. Peace.